When God moves you into hiding, from Galatians 1:21. I've been going through this verse by verse. Sometimes God puts you in a place so he can grow you apart from others. And we'll talk about that, but here it is from Galatians 1:21, Paul writing to the churches at Galatia in that region. He says, "Then I went into the regions of Syria and Cilicia." And so my name is Darren. This is Line by Line. We teach you to study the Bible, literally verse by verse, line by line, with clarity, confidence, and courage. And if you'd like to know more about how to study the Bible, put TIPS, T-I-P-S, into the link below. Been doing this for 25 years, been heard around the world, taught mostly at the local church level. God has been very gracious. But this lesson today reminds us of what God does. And we kind of talked about this in verse 17 a few videos ago, but I think it's worth repeating. You could entitle this, When God Moves You into Hiding, Part 2. Because really, Paul's repeating different things, but with the same things, but with different locations. Sometimes God has to hide you to shape you. That's the big idea. Sometimes God has to hide you to shape you. First point I want you to know is God prepares us in obscurity. Before Paul preached to the world, God pulled him into silence. God pulled him into Arabia and Damascus, and then into Syria, and then to Cilicia, can't get the word out this morning. And these hidden years were not wasted years. They were holy years. And I can't tell you how many pastors and missionaries and just random people who've grown strong in the Lord will often say, I was in a small church somewhere, or I was in a small town, or I was in the country, or I was in an inner city church that no one cared about or knew about. And that's where God shaped me. And God put me there, and I met this person, and I met that person, and boy, they were the strongest Christian I ever met. Can't tell you how many times over the years I've heard that, and thank the Lord for that. If you're in a small church, if you're in a place of no renown, and you're just around faithful, godly people, praise God for that. I mean, that is a blessing in itself. God's classroom is often humility and endurance and perseverance through situations and in contexts that have no limelight. Nobody cares about them. They're a blip on the map. Our family, as of this recording, we've been watching a guy called I don't mind telling you who it is. It's called The Wise Guy, Travel with a Wise Guy, or something like that. He's a local guy to us. He literally just puts his camera on and zooms through obscure places in the Midwest of the United States. And it's very interesting. And just the stories he finds on these ghost towns or random places that have 50 people that at one point were maybe something or significant but are no longer, is really interesting. And it's interesting because that's exactly what God did with Paul. Because he says, like Isaiah 49:2, that he made him a polished arrow. In his quiver, he hid me away. Guys, God will often put you in places away from people, not necessarily a local church, I'm not saying that, but he will put you away from opportunities that you may be ready for someday to prepare you for those places right now. Isn't that what has happened so many times? And so don't think because God has you in a place that you don't see as significant, the world doesn't see as significant, that God won't put you there. And even if you never get known, who cares? What matters is that you are faithful to the task God has called you to be and the people he's called you to. Second thing I want you to know, when God hides you away, is that God places us where we are useful. There are two names listed here, two geographic names listed here. First is Syria. Syria is a melting pot of that day. Jews, Greeks, Romans. I mean, it was just a melting pot. It's on the northern side of of kind of where the Mediterranean goes into Turkey, modern day Turkey and Syria. And basically the hometown there was Antioch. And you may remember in Acts 11 through 13, this is where Barnabas met Paul. And this is where Paul became useful for the larger church out of the obscurity. But he went to basically Syria. Paul was being shown that it's not about the place, it's about the God of the place. And God is everywhere, he's omnipresent. But Paul was in a melting pot. And you all remember too that later in Acts it says they were first called Christians, at Antioch, literally little Christ followers. And so this is significant because it's there. But what about the other place, Sicilia? This is a place where Paul would know well. This was a intellectual, political powerhouse. The capital of that region, Cilicia, was Tarsus. Well, where was Paul from? He was Paul of Tarsus. Isn't it interesting that Paul was sent to places, including a place that he was grown and reared and taught the ways of Judaism in, so that he could be a witness? Friend, God will often call you to a place that God will use you. And you say, didn't Jesus say a prophet has no honor in his hometown? Yeah, that's true. And that is true. Most places where you grew up will not accept you as a person of faith because they know your past, even though God has forgiven that. But God sent Paul home so grace could be seen by those who doubted him. God sent Paul home so they could see the grace of God in him when they doubted him. This is what Mark 5:19 says. It says, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you. That was one of the healing incidents of Christ that he told the person to go and do. So God may send you home to your hometown. You may have to do the walk of shame, as they say, for a minute, but you get to tell about the providence of grace as you do that. So just trust the Lord in the timing of all that. Trust the Lord in the provision of all that, but God does provide in those seasons. And I want you to know finally that God promotes in his time. God promotes in his time. When he hides you away, he's going to place you where you're useful. He's going to use you in obscurity, but he's also going to promote you in his time. Paul waited for years before called to Antioch, before Barnabas called him to Antioch. We know at least 3 of those years. And what felt like delay was divine design. You know, sometimes I can think of, and this is not a flex or a hey, look at me, but I can remember back in 2006, a friend of mine in college, Tim, still a good friend to this day, challenged me to run a marathon. I had 8 weeks to train. I was young and dumb. I was a runner. I was in shape enough that no big deal. And I just remember I was trying to qualify for the Boston Marathon. I thought, you know what? The pace I need to run is what we do as warm-ups in college. No big deal. Well, if you know anything about marathoning, you hear that phrase, life is a marathon, not a sprint. True. But you also hear about the wall. When scientifically your glycogen inside of you, your energy stores get depleted and you literally hit a wall. Your body can't go forward. And so I remember that I got to mile 22, top 5 of the race, clicking along, well ahead of qualifying time for Boston, and I literally blacked out. I somehow finished the last 4 or so miles, don't remember what happened. Thank the Lord I'm safe, but it took 15 more years before I qualified for the Boston Marathon after multiple attempts, knowing I had the ability, but the timing wasn't right. What is my point? It's not that every time that you want something, you'll get it, but what feels like delay is divine design, and God never wastes preparation. And friends, if it seems slow, Habakkuk 2:3 says, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. So for some of you today, it may be that you just need to hunker down, embrace the season you're in, and celebrate the wins that God gives you every single day. You are saved by grace through faith. This is not of yourselves. This is the gift of God. You have done all these things by his grace, and in doing so, you can see the fruit. It is not about climbing some religious spiritual ladder. It is about being faithful to where God has put you. But every step of grace and providence is a step of preparation and purpose that he has for you. So let me know how we can pray for you in the comments below. Otherwise, until next time, study the Bible with clarity, confidence, and courage, line by line.